So our next presenter is from the MIT Sloan Center, and she is both an author and a research specialist. And she has been specializing in the analysis of behavioral organizational change driven through disruption. So it's going to be some really interesting points made here by Stephanie. And I think one of the most interesting things I found out about Stephanie over the course of the last morning or so is that before going back into academia, Stephanie was actually selling dairy equipment products as part of a sideline and a focus of hers. So you can all talk to her about that over dinner tonight. So look forward to hearing more about that. Stephanie, welcome onto the stage.
Thank you so much. I found that last video to be really interesting because my big question for you is, how are you going to make money in the digital economy? Now, are my slides, they're not?
Yep, green for go.
Mm-hmm.
Slides, guys.
Thank you very much. Okay, so my question for you is, how are you going to make money in the digital economy? And my colleague Peter Weil and I, we're both research scientists at the Center for Information Systems Research. We've been studying that question for over 5 years. We've interviewed executives at over 50 companies, and we've done surveys, several surveys that have over 1,000 respondents. Our book, What's Your Digital Business Model, is our attempt to go and answer that question. How are you going to make money in the digital economy? And in the digital economy, most companies are not going to succeed just by tweaking their management practices that led to their past success. At large enterprises, the ones that the MIT Center for Information Systems Research studies, are particular targets for digital disruption because they have a somewhat patchy customer experience, they have a large customer base, and they have juicy profits. And those startups and those companies from other industries want access to those profits. So large companies, in fact, all companies are being bombarded by technologies like social and mobile and IoT, but digital transformation is not really about digital. It's really about change. It's really about reinventing yourself. So to think about how you're going to change your business model, your culture, your people. And what this book does is we've tried to go and lay out a framework that helps companies think about how they're going to go and do that. To go and make this come to life, I'm going to use Schneider Electric as a case study running throughout the organization, running throughout this talk. Schneider Electric, a global company, they're a leader in energy management and automation. They're really what we would call a big old company. They were founded in 1836. They operate in 4 markets: building and partnering, infrastructure, industry, and IT. And between 2002 and 2008, they doubled in size through organic growth and through acquisitions. And that's going to be important in terms of their transformation. So I'm going to describe the 6 questions that we lay out that we think can help executives who want to transform. We think that they need to be able to answer all 6 of these questions if they're going to do it successfully. So the first question is, what is your digital threat and what's the opportunity? Now, threat comes from many, many places. One is it can come from startups. So think about Airbnb or Uber coming into transportation and the hotel industry. It can come from companies who are already in your industry who actually come up with a different business model, and they can go and then cannibalize your profits. Or you can have a company that's not in your industry at all who comes in and has a better way of doing business. A lot of people think about Amazon in this way, and one of the latest things that Amazon has announced, I think, is really provocative, which is that they're partnering with Berkshire Hathaway and JP Morgan Chase to look at the health industry. Now, none of them do health, but are you going to count out Amazon? Not sure, who knows, it could be a bust, but it's still an interesting question. When you talk about digital threat, one of the questions that we like to ask companies is, what percentage of your revenues are under threat for the next 5 years? And in the research that we've done, we show that the average company says that 28% of their revenues are under threat, and large companies, companies that have over $7 billion in revenues, say that 46% of their revenues are under threat. And what's interesting about that number is, one, it certainly focuses your senior executive team, and the other is, think about what it means. It means you really have to change because you've got to replace, in the case of large companies, almost 50% of your revenues, or you have to defend almost 50% of your revenues. And that's just to stay even. That's not even to grow. So if you think about Schneider Electric and what their threat was, and then also what their opportunity was, is by 2009, their high level of business unit autonomy that had driven their acquisition meant that they had lots of variability. They had 150 ERP systems, which meant that they had no idea who their customer was actually in a 360-degree view. They had a lot of fragmentation of enterprise processes and lots of missed revenue opportunities, because think about it, if you've got 150 ERP systems, you have a customer who wants to come in and buy products from several different business units. They actually are going to have a hard time doing that because they really can't find that. And there were also a lot of startups who were eager to come in and through better search actually take over some of those profits. And then finally, you would say that their customer experience was really, really not good at all because it was so complex, customers didn't know what to do. So they thought of themselves as really facing a lot of threat and a lot of potential loss of revenue because they could lose not just the product sales, but also the maintenance contracts. So the next question is which business model is best for your enterprise's future? And we talked to many, many companies. We started this research off by convening a set of CIOs, really several different roundtables, and asking them, what's your most important IT-enabled business transformation project? We got 144 initiatives. We then sat down and we looked and tried to find common dimensions. And finally, we found two key dimensions. The first one was that many companies were trying to move beyond these controlled value chains to a more complex networked system. They were seeing that they had to move away from just strict one-to-one contracts to really this idea that they were going to involve not just suppliers, but they needed to think about partners, they needed to think about complementary services, and they needed to think about how they were going to use their customers as they developed new products and services. The second dimension was, how well do you know your customers? Think about Schneider Electric. They actually didn't know their customers very well at all because it was, knowledge about their customers was spread throughout the organization. So we saw a lot of organizations trying to figure out what kinds of projects could they do to learn more about their customers. Sometimes it was going out into the marketplace. Other times it was thinking about consolidating and exploiting the information that they already had. So that, in true academic fashion, gives you a 2x2. And I'm going to describe the 4 business models. The first one is what we call a supplier. And a supplier is a company that sells through other companies. So they really need an intermediary. And a lot of suppliers don't know very much about their customer. And we see a company like Procter & Gamble could be considered a supplier because they really are selling their products to, say, Walmart or Target, and they don't know who's actually come in to purchase the product and why they've purchased the product. The second is an omni-channel business model. And this is a kind of business model where you're providing access to your customers, to your customers all of your products through multiple channels, including physical and digital. And this is a business model we see a lot of banks and retail moving to because there's a lot of demand from customers. The third business model is a modular producer. This is one that Peter and I think is fascinating. We thought that it was really just a digital business model and that it had no counterpart in a pre-digital economy, but we're finding out that that's actually not so true. Modular producers actually plug and play their products and services into every company's ecosystem. So they have to be open, they need to be technology savvy, and they need to be secure. We think of PayPal as being an example of a modular producer. And then finally, there's ecosystem driver. Amazon would be an ecosystem driver. These are organizations that create, they're a coordinated network of enterprises, devices, customers, partners that create value for all of the people in the network. And this is a business model that we see a lot of companies aspiring to. It's a very difficult business model to get to. We talk in the book about what are the kinds of capabilities that you need to build to become an ecosystem driver. In 2009, Schneider Electric was really a supplier. They were selling through a lot of intermediaries. There was very little that they weren't interacting directly with a lot of their customers. And what they looked ahead and said, you know, we want to be an ecosystem driver. We want to be the platform, the destination that our customers come to when they have electrical management facilities kinds of problems to be solved. And that means we're going to have to create these integrated solutions that go across product lines and across channels. And that meant that they really had to think about how they were going to change and what kind of capabilities they needed to build to move from being a supplier up to an ecosystem driver. They did not do it in one fell swoop. This took a while for them to do. And that leads right into what's your competitive advantage, your digital competitive advantage. We've identified 3 sources of competitive advantage. One is, what's your content? What are your products and your services that you sell, and what's the information around those products and services? The second competitive advantage is customer experience, which is how do your customers, how do they interact with your products? How do they experience your products? And do you have things like community and reputation management and reputation and ease of use and mobile, all making it so that you have this great experience for your customers no matter which channel they choose. And then finally, the third source of competitive advantage is platform. So what's the kind of technology? How do you deliver that content? And how do you have a customer experience that sits on top of that platform? So we think that suppliers really have to be great at content. And that is what Schneider Electric was. They had great products. However, if you want to be a really great omni-channel and then move into an ecosystem driver, you have to have a great customer experience. So that is actually what Schneider Electric, that was the first thing that they started doing in 2009. They looked across, they saw their threat, they said, you know, we don't want to be a supplier. We actually want to move and change our business model. We want to be able to create services that people are going to pay for rather than products. And so they started with a project called One Schneider, which was a big global CRM project. They knew it was going to take a lot of time to integrate and to rationalize 150 ERP systems. So instead, they started with their customer data and decided that if they could put it all into Salesforce, and then that would give them an opportunity to let salespeople look across business units, and they set themselves a metric of cross-sell. So could they increase their cross-sell? So the fourth question is, how are you going to connect using mobile and IoT? Now, frankly, we could have probably chosen any set of technologies here. We chose mobile and IoT because we thought that together they really make a formidable, they're a formidable weapon. That's kind of a warlike, but they're a formidable combination. Especially because what we'll see is that mobile really allows you to have a direct access to your customer. It allows you to collect information about your customer. It allows you to see what they're doing and to see how they're actually using your product. And IoT with sensors is a way for enterprises to collect data about the customer, but also to provide services. So we think that the two of them together are kind of connectivity on steroids. And it's a lot of, the overlap offers it's an opportunity, we think, for financial gain. And the intersection of this, imagine your home security system. It really puts the customer in control with their mobile app, and you have the enterprise collecting data about how the system is used, and then being able to add on more services that the customer may actually want. So we've looked into kind of the home security network type of products, and they all have a mobile app for the customer. All the products are connected, and then if you look at these companies, they're trying to add in, say, lighting, security, thermostat, and together they're trying to create a set of services that customers want and that enterprises can offer. And then we think eventually it's going to get to a point where possibly you could do this by algorithm, and you wouldn't even need to have the customer pulling together, actually intervening. Schneider Electric saw especially IoT as being very important, because if they wanted to be an ecosystem driver, they needed to start thinking about how to connect all of their products together so that they could create these integrated solutions to go and manage a property. So nobody is going to want a solution that's just going to have, that's just going to allow you to go and manage the lights. You're going to have to manage electricity use. You're going to have to manage your HVAC. They need to be able to communicate with each other. But at the same time, they're going to need to have, they needed a mobile app so that facility managers, building managers, and people like that could actually see what was going on in the building and could actually intervene, see when there was a need for, say, maintenance or something like that. So for Schneider Electric, they really thought about this connection as being important, and then after they finished their global CRM, they put into place another project called Connect, which is kind of self-explanatory. And the Connect project was one where they were thinking about IoT and sensors, but then also service enabling their core capabilities with APIs so that they could then do something with that data that they were getting from the sensors. The fifth question is where we start to get into what are the kinds of capabilities that you need to build that we think of as going up, which is learning more about your customer, and then moving right, becoming more networked. And we identified 8 capabilities, 4 in each, and the capabilities are things like how do you amplify the voice of the customer inside your enterprise? Are you able to gather and use great customer data? So it's not just putting it all together, consolidating your information, but it's, are you able to use it? Have you created a culture based on evidence? So have you thought about really disregarding the highest paid person in the room's opinion and instead saying, well, what we need to start doing is experiments. I mean, being at MIT, doing experiments seems like a natural way to find out information. And then also, can you iterate? Can you test and learn? Moving right means you need to start thinking about your organization in a different way. Are you a destination? I mean, think about what it is that customers are trying to figure out. They have these problems that they're trying to solve. And in fact, one of the pieces of information that I found in my random trolling of the web is that here in the US, Amazon actually accounts for 49% of all search around consumer products. Think about it. Amazon has become a destination when it's around retail. That's where people go to solve a problem. They're not going to Google or to Bing. They're starting at Amazon. Doesn't mean that they stay at Amazon, but that's where they start. And that's one of the key things that companies that are trying to become more of a part of a network need to be thinking about. What is their company? They need to be great at partnerships and acquisitions. Service enabling with your API, with your core capabilities with APIs, turns out in all of our research to be really important. It's kind of an indicator. It means that you know which of your core capabilities are your crown jewels, so you've already identified them. It also means that your platform is good enough that you actually can do something once you go and create the API. And then finally, if you're going to participate in a network, you have to be great at efficiency and security and compliance. It's just, there's a lot of data that's flowing in these ecosystems, and you really have to think about how you're going to secure your customers' data. So think about what Schneider Electric did. They did their moving up, they did their CRM project. Moving right, they really thought about service enabling with APIs and really having sensors in all of their products. And then on top of that, they actually reorganized for efficiency. They knew that they had many different ways of doing things. And so their CIO, Hervé Coriel, really became, they consolidated and they created a new organization called Information Processes and Organization, IPO, and it brought into place all of these technological, these digital capabilities so that they could start to have one best way of doing things across the organization. At this point, they've now rationalized down to 12 ERP systems, and I think they're pretty happy. That's a big, big change, allows for a lot of efficiencies. And they've also started to work on their supply chain so that they can get more efficiencies that way. And then finally, the sixth question is, do you have the leadership to make the transformation happen? And we looked at leadership at a number of different levels. So we certainly thought about the CEO, and that is, the CEO is a really important part of any kind of transformation. The CEO has to communicate the vision. He got to sell the vision, really get all of the employees on board. And differently from the pre-digital era, CEOs have to think about coaching. It's not just telling people you need to do this and expect that they're going to do it, but sometimes your employees are going to need a lot of coaching. Your executive committee is going to need a lot of coaching. We also looked at the board. We have some really interesting new research coming out about how important is it to have a digitally savvy board and what does it take. Boards actually fund what these large companies do, and they support the CEO. So you want a board who understands what's happening and knows how they can at least support the strategy. They shouldn't be dictating the strategy, but they need to know enough about digital to know what digital can do for both the industry and the company. We looked at employees. Employees have a big role to play in the organization because you're asking them to work differently. You're asking them to adopt new ways of thinking. So for instance, they need to have a platform mindset. What is it that they can automate? What is it that they can reuse? And as part of getting there, they're often going to be working in agile ways. So they're going to not be having long-standing projects. They're going to be working in shorter sprints. They're going to be iterating. And it's a very different way of asking employees to work. So they need to be, they themselves are actually going to lead. We've done an interview with one company that said that actually moving to agile was as difficult for management as it was for the employees. The employees actually loved it. They pretty well got on board right away, but management was all of a sudden going, well, wait a minute, I'm not telling them what to do? What's my role here? How do I actually lead here? And so that's a big step for a lot of leaders in the organization. And then finally, you have the role of the CIO. And in a digital transformation, the CIO is really important. CIOs know how to integrate. They know how to take those silos. They know how to connect them. They have a platform mindset. And so any digital transformation, most of the ones everyone that we've seen and we've studied actually has the CIO playing an important role. If you think about what Schneider Electric did, this was actually a transformation from 2009 up to now. It's one that from the highest levels to the lowest levels, everyone's been on board. So the CEO, Jean-Pascal Tricoire, actually has had workshops about digital, has gone to the board and talked about digital. And really, we can think about him and his executive team as being kind of architects of this transformation. So they communicated the need for cultural change. They did a lot of off-site strategy retreats. And they developed playbooks so that employees could talk about what were the best practices that they had seen. They also went and created a company-wide wiki so that employees could contribute and they could learn from each other. So this was a transformation that happened across all levels. So let's recap what Schneider did going through the questions. So the first is they identified their threat. They had fragmentation, cost inefficiencies, and complexity that was borne by the customers, and probably by the employees too. They wanted to move from being a supplier to really and eventually an ecosystem driver. And to do that, they needed to make many more connections, both internally and externally, and they needed a better knowledge of their customer. They decided that their competitive advantage was going to be a world-class customer experience. That was going to be what draws their customers to them. They put great effort into making their products connectable with APIs, and they invested in customers and technology, and they developed the ability to cut costs while innovating. And then they made it happen by leadership throughout the whole company. And if you look at their outcomes to date, their customers are up to 65% energy efficiency, up from 30%. Over 44% of their revenue is coming from IoT-enabled solutions, and they have 40 digital services so far. They've got a 20% growth in assets under management, so that would be buildings where they take care of everything within the building. And then finally, they've had an increase of 20% increase in cross-selling, which is one of the metrics that they put in place at the very beginning of their organization. And so we think that most companies are at a fork in the road. Are they going to focus on transactions? And and the outcome of just focusing on transactions is going to be a real need for efficiency. You're really going to be pushed to the back end, and it's going to be a cost. Move. Or are you going to think about creating a deep customer experience in a web of partners and suppliers and customer relationships? And are you going to solve your customers' problems, or are you going to sell them products? Answer these 6 questions to help you decide what kind of company you are going to build and lead. So thank you. So I think we
have some time for questions.
Yes, we do have time for questions.
We have about 5-10 minutes for questions. So I'm going to start while you think about yours and you get the roving mic.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to start with a quick question as to why do you think it's taking organizations so long to actually, address the disruption? What's the number one thing that you think is holding them back? So you talked about the 6 things they need to do. We heard from Van that he thinks is, just starting on the journey. What do you think is the biggest issue?
Well, companies have actually, our research shows, in other research that we've done on the pathways to digital business transformation, we show that the average company is about 33% along. Knowing that transformation is never going to stop, but most companies feel like they've really made a step. Legacy systems actually are a real difficulty. You really need to be thinking about platforms, and that means that you've got to have leadership that's going to be willing to invest in a platform, and you're going to have to really think about changing the ways that you work, because reuse becomes important, automation becomes important. You're going to be thinking about one way to like onboard a customer. It means that you're going to probably disrupt power bases within the organization. So I think that those are probably some of the key issues there.
Okay, and any questions from the room? Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, question over there. Can we have a mic over here, please? Thanks, Prashant.
Hi,
Hi.
Very impressive talk and great work. Looking forward to read this book. You talked about the role of the CEO, the board, as well as the CIO. What about the role of the CFO? You know, because Agile is more OpEx oriented to begin with. Fundamentally, a lot of technology and this deep thinking has always been oriented towards CapEx. So there's this conflict about making, you know, more of Agile and the role of the CFO there.
So you're asking, what's the role of the CFO, and can Agile become more important in, say, CFO land?
Yeah.
So I will say,
and also funding more of, let's say, you know, small sprints, and which are more OpEx oriented, as against some very large programs. To begin.
Honestly, we have not studied the CFO really in particular. I know that a lot of CIOs report to the CFO. One of my colleagues, Christine Derry, and another colleague, Nick Vandermeulen, are doing a project on Agile at scale. One of the most interesting little case vignettes that they're talking about presenting has to do with DBS Bank in Singapore that has actually implemented Agile within their audit organization. So it's not quite CFO, but I think that these are some of the things that you could probably learn, the CFO's organization could probably learn from that. The reason that audit decided in DBS that they needed to go to Agile is that a lot of projects were coming to audit at the end, and audit was having to go in and say, oh, you're done, and here's a problem, and here's a problem, and here's a problem. And they found that if they can actually move along and Agile, they can start to address problems earlier in the cycle. They may not go any faster, but it means that when they get to the end of a project, it's actually done and they've thought about it. So I'm not sure how that would fit with the CFO, but I think that there may be some lessons there.
Sure.
So
Thank you.
Kula, can you just put your hand up, because this is the gentleman to sit next to tonight. He's our CFO, and you can spend time asking him. Yeah. Can you just wave to us so Stephanie knows you? Yeah, he's shy. He's over there. Okay. Any other questions for Stephanie? We've got time for some more. Yeah.
We've got one right there.
Oh, a couple over here.
You could shout.
Prashant, you need to get running. Come on. Time is of the essence. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Maria Susan, right?
Yes.
From MIT, I am leading the digital supply chain transformation.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
So then my question is, I think that from our point of view, it's important to transfer this value created from the customer upstream in the supply chain with different, suppliers, different stakeholders, that even they can play different roles.
Yes, I think we're going to.
This game. You talk about the Schneider Electric and the relationship with some of their customers, but what about more upstream? How we can, from the point of view about transferring this value upstream in the suppliers, how we can split this value into different savings or different value sharing kind of approach with the suppliers, right? So what do you think about this?
Well, I think that value sharing, especially as you start to change your business model somewhat, I think that there's going to be differences in the way that you share, that value sharing is going to become more important. Honestly, I haven't thought a lot about the supply chain, but you're at MIT. We should talk, shouldn't we? Yeah. Okay, that would be great.
And I saw a couple more hands. Alex? Go.
Question. One of the things we find is change is very difficult at an executive level, because with a lot of leaders that get to that point, is what they did to get there is not going to work to move forward. So with Schneider Electric and with other companies you work with, where do you find the change coming from, in the sense of what is the thing that finally gets them out of the swarm of the day-to-day to get to this point? And do you find that you have to have an actually switch of leadership, or are you finding that leaders are actually able to pivot and actually move this way?
Some are able to pivot. So we saw some change in Schneider's leadership, but in general, I think they've been fairly stable. We've looked at other organizations, say BBVA in Spain, where their chairman, who is over 70, actually ran. He knew that there was something that digital could do, and he was really very prescient in looking forward. And eventually, they actually had to change over several of their key executives. And so it kind of depends. Also, you need to have a board in there who actually understands what you're doing so that they can back up the CEO as he undergoes. This is one of the hardest things that CEOs are going to do, which is going to be reorganize, do what we call organizational surgery so that you can actually perform well.
And do you find what's more of what works better, bottoms up to push this or top down?
You're going to have, okay, as an organizational person, I'm going to say you got to have both. I mean, the thing is if you don't have your CEO and your executive committee out there just really driving home that they need to change, but then at the same time getting the people on board saying, well, what do you know and what are your best practices? And hey, we're going to ask you to change the way that you're going to work. So what can we learn from you and how can you be? I don't see how you can do it without both. And I think that you may have a grand idea, you may have a big idea of what the transformation is going to look like at the top. And then you have, the board getting on track with it too. But if you don't quickly get your people on board and get them excited about doing it, and we think that especially your younger employees, might find this very exciting. I mean, really, it plays into what they know best. And so why wouldn't you actually get them excited about transformation?
That's fantastic. Thanks, Stephanie. And I know we had a question over there, so can we have a mic here, please? Thank you.
A short one, I would like to understand the perspective of artificial intelligence impacting digital business model.
Okay. Artificial intelligence was actually not part of this research. Now, my colleague Jeannie Ross has done some work on, she called it cognitive computing. Essentially, I think that there are going to be some companies that have a lot of data, actually have the data analytics capability, that may actually at this stage at this point in time, be able to use artificial intelligence to help them change their business model. I think that most companies are not quite there yet. One is they've got to get better at using their data in general. So if they are not good at using little data, if they're not good at consolidating their customer data and actually using that to make inferences, I don't know that they have the mindset to actually then go to AI and machine learning. I think it's going to be pretty fast, and we're going to start to see some changes probably in the next couple of years. It's just when we started this research, AI was really, it was only being done in a very small number of places. And companies have to have a lot of data to actually make that. I mean, with this board research, we just did machine learning. Wow. And there's a lot of coding, and you've got to be thinking about, not introducing biases or being very careful about how you determine what you're going to machine learn on.
That's great. And was there one last question from this side of the room? Has everybody answered? Was there anybody else back there? Saw another hand go up. Yeah, over there, Krishna. Can we have a microphone for Krishna? She's very soft, this one.
I can hear you, but...
Come on, Prashant.
Stephanie, the talk was really interesting.
Thank you.
There was something that really stood out for me was when you said that the employees need to have a platform mindset and they need to be comfortable with short stint projects.
Mm-hmm.
Could you expand on that a little bit more? Because what does it mean for an organization? How do you take employees through it? And what does it mean for employees in terms of the skills?
So let's start with skills. I mean, skills, I think you need to have employees who think about data as a way to create hypotheses, as a way to, create insights. do those hypotheses, create insights, and then act on those insights. So in your organization, you actually have to give them enough authority to act on those insights. The platform mindset really goes back to a lot of the work that we at the Center for Information Systems Research have done on how do you build a platform, how do you take these silos, this spaghetti, and turn it into a digitized platform. And so it really means thinking about things in terms of are you creating digital services? Are they modules that can plug and play? So you need to be able, it's not just a module, but you've got to be able to have the platform so you can plug and play and think about decomposing. So they're not giant big projects, but more digital services that are by themselves. Reuse turns out to be really important because if you can reuse, one, you have, you've got your data more standardized, but then at the same time, you're able to eventually, maybe not the first time through, but you're able to move some of your spending from just running the organization to putting it over toward innovation. So I think that you may see some of these skills and these mindsets in, say, some of your IT people or some of your developers, and then what you need to do is figure out how do you move those mindsets into the rest of the organization. It does mean that you've got to get good at getting everybody in the organization to prioritize and to think about, it's not my project versus your project, but what's the project that we need to do so that we actually move the organization along. So I think that those are some of the things that you have to do. It probably, this is where I think leadership is really important because they can model that. If you have the executive committee working as a team and everybody sees them working as a team and putting forth projects that benefit the entire organization rather than one business unit, I think that that is a very good cultural shift.
That's great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. Very, very interesting, thought-provoking presentation. We really appreciate it.